Your lines are holding you back, and some of you don't even realize it. You might think your biggest problem is that your rendering looks off, things don't look consistent, or just composition issues. And trust me, those things are issues you should fix down the line too. But all that stuff is rooted down into one thing: how well can you draw? More specifically, how well can you do your lines? Even more specifically, how well are you able to sketch and have confident lines? Look at this. How long do you think it took me to make this? 2 hours? 3? 1.5? Nope. 45 minutes. Riddle me this. When's the last time you sat down, used one layer, one brush, one reference, and just sketch whatever came to your mind? The last time you ditched all those easy drawing softwares and undos and erasers and just drew with pen on paper. My point is, before we get carried away with all the colors this, process that in my previous videos, we should focus on the roots of drawing, the actual lines and the drawing aspect of it. Alright, now that we're on the same page and we've established that lines are important, well, now what do we do about it? How should we improve our lines, and how specifically will that help our drawings? Well, as you could tell by the title and the thumbnail and the intro, that's what this video is about. So sit down, grab a sketchbook, and let's get right into it. Line properties. Before we get into fixing your lines, let's talk about what a line even is. A line is a connection between 2 points. Actually, I don't really know where I was going with that. Anyways, what are the main properties of a line that we should be looking out for? The first big one is the size. Being able to effectively change the size of your lines and taper the ends of it are huge ways of easily creating an interesting style and show a lot of confidence right out the get-go. Keep this in the forefront of your mind. The main thing that you want to focus on is conveying confidence through your lines, of which I'll get into the specifics of later. So first thing is how big and small your lines are. I think everyone can agree that that's pretty important that you need to control. But the next thing up is opacity. For opacity, I think a few of you might disagree that you need to use it all the time, but for me personally, I use it in pretty much everything that I do, and I see a lot of other painter-like artists doing the same. Opacity is basically controlling how light or dark your lines end up based on your pressure of how hard you're pressing your pen down. In my personal experiences, I find it a necessity because when I started out drawing, I didn't really have any tablets or software. I just had a pencil and paper, and that basically just gave me opacity from the get-go because, well, pencils, it gets darker as you shade harder. I also think it gives a really good layered shading effect to your lines that you otherwise wouldn't have if it was just bold, black, one color. The last big property that everyone should keep in mind is your strokes. How are your stroke styles? Are they long, layered, a bunch of scribbles? There are so many different strokes that you can go for, and I would suggest that you try as many as you possibly can, because your line strokes are something where you don't just want to learn one and stop there. The more you know, the better you are overall as an artist. And those are all of the 3 main line properties that you should keep track of. There are a bunch more, but those are all really specific and you shouldn't really be focusing on them in the beginning. Really simple, I know, but that's the point of lines. They're not meant to be some hard, complicated thing. And one more thing, just because I say you have to keep these properties in mind doesn't mean that you have to use all of them all the time. Sometimes if you don't want a bunch of line width or you just want some big, bold, no opacity lines, that's completely fine. But at this point, I'm sure you guys have a few questions, like how do you know if you're actually making good line strokes? What specifically do I mean when I say line confidence? How am I able to make this and that so quickly? Why do I have this tail? Like, it's all long and it cuts out of the screen. Like, why didn't I design this character better? Using lines effectively. You don't want people viewing your art to think that what you're doing isn't intentional or that you were scared or struggled through certain parts of it. Although it's obvious to you where you struggled, to others viewing it, they could gloss over your mistakes completely even though you fussed over it for hours, and that's a good thing. When I sketch or use my lines, I think of 2 things and 2 things only: efficiency, and confidence. As I said before, you want your lines to look confident. Every stroke you make needs to look like that you planned it, even if you didn't. To do this, it's all in the mentality and practice. You need to think and be confident so that you can make what you imagine and make it look confident. I know it sounds a bit complicated, but essentially you just need to be confident in yourself, or else you'll psych yourself out and it'll show in your drawings. Now, on the efficiency side of things, you need to minimize the amount of time and strokes that it takes you to make things. I'm not saying you have to be a machine or the most accurate thing in the world. I mean, just look at the way that I sketch. You just need to convey what you want in the least amount of time possible. Of course, the way you go about this is different depending on the style. If you're just doing a sketch, then it's effective to overlap your lines or find certain lines after a few tries. But don't do things like chicken scratches or a bunch of wobbly, unsure lines. If you're doing line art, then yes, try to get that line in one big stroke as perfect as you possibly can. But again, we're on the clock. You can't be wasting so much time on like an arm or an eyeball or something. How I'm able to make something like this in less than an hour, it's all because every stroke I make or eraser mark has a purpose, and I'm sure that I make mistakes here and there, but I'm confident in the mistakes that I make. So in the finished piece, I'm sure there's a lot of things that you guys didn't notice at first glance. Hopefully, maybe not, I don't know. Fixing the problems. Alright, so the part that most of you have probably been waiting for. How do we improve our lines? How do I get to be a true art goat like Kim Jong-gi? Rest in peace forever, you will be remembered. Short answer, draw a lot. Long answer, the same exact thing. The simplest answer is sometimes the best one, and this is one of those cases. But here's a few ways that you can practice in ways that'll specifically maximize your lines. One thing that you can try if you're completely new to this and have no idea where to start is doing line warm-ups. The premise of this is very simple. You basically just draw lines vertically, horizontally, and diagonally as straight as you possibly can, trying to control your lines. Then you can do some practice doing circles, making basic shapes, basically just trying to make them look as clean as you can. But again, these are only practices that you really need if you're a complete beginner and have no idea where to start. But for people that have already, drawn for a while and are a bit more confident in making straight, good looking lines, here's a few avenues that you can go down. Set a timer for, let's say, 1 to 1.5 hours. Find a good reference and sketch something based on that reference with only 2 layers, one for a rough sketch if you need it, and one for the main thing. And make sure you only use one good brush. It's important that you stick to one layer and one brush because you want to build confidence. You don't want to mix everything up because you're using 5 different brushes, and you don't want to be less confident because you're separating every little layer into its own thing, and it's a whole mess. Again, what's the point of this? Confidence and efficiency. You want to be lowering that timer little by little every time you sketch, not because you want to challenge yourself, but because you're finishing early. Here I did 3 sketches, each of them taking about 45 minutes to an hour, and to challenge myself, I went into Procreate, which I've never really used before this video, and I used one brush this entire time. This was the default square brush, and it didn't even change in line size. I was basically stuck just doing either skinny lines or big bold lines. But one good thing to this brush was that it had really good opacity settings for pressure, so I just made do with what I had. As you guys probably saw from the time lapses that I hopefully put in this video, there are a lot of mistakes that I made while doing these, but the drawings as a whole still read decently well due to the confidence that I've built up over the past few years. While doing this, try to get real immersed in the feeling of drawing on an actual piece of paper with pencil. Or better yet, actually do so. Everything I've talked about in this video can be easily applied to traditional drawing as well. I've done this many times in the past, and I'm sure that you guys will have a blast with it. Of course, while doing this, you can also focus on other fundamentals like anatomy and perspective, of which I'll make videos on later, but for now, just really try to focus on those lines. Alright, so now you know what to do, so go and use that sketchbook that I asked you to grab earlier, and I'll see you guys in the next one.